Welcome to the show today. I'm Jason Miller, and today I'm speaking with Rob Carey, the Vice President of the Navy and Marine Corps Programs at Vencor. Rob, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jason.
Well, there's always plenty to talk about when it comes to cybersecurity. Aftermath of the OPM data breach, the ongoing debate on Capitol Hill over legislation, and of course, this is the time of year, new FISMA, Federal Information Security Management Act metrics come out. All CIOs and the like are very excited, waiting with bated breath from OMB and DHS for those new metrics. In some ways, there's never been a larger focus on cybersecurity than right now. And at the same time, agencies and businesses are facing an ever-increasing threat environment and a growing attack surface from mobile devices to the growth of the Internet of Things or non-traditional devices connected over the Internet. Let me turn to Rob Carey to begin our discussion today. One of the things about cybersecurity is where are we today, where are we going tomorrow? So let's start with the today question. What is the state of the federal cybersecurity just a few months after the OMB Cyber Sprint?
So I think, Jason, it's in a state of transition. I think that it's been illuminated. That's a good thing. The bad thing is it was illuminated by a bad event, the hack. So I would give us sort of this grade of D with a chance to get to an A at some point in time. Why do I give us a D? Because frankly, what Tony Scott and the Sprint is aimed at doing is establishing the knowledge of the federal cybersecurity network baseline, which is something we might imagine that we sort of had and could then grow off of. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of accountability to be built in. There's a lot of investment that must be made. The CIOs and the CISOs run off of the budgets they are given, not necessarily the budgets they desire. And so I think it makes it that much harder. The sprint becomes the identification phase of the what needs to be done.
And there's several pieces of that sprint. I mean, if you think about two-factor authentication, the reduction of privileged users, the idea of let's identify the critical data assets, but also let's make sure we're closing critical vulnerabilities. As you looked across those 5 or 6 different pieces of the cyber sprint, was there one from your perspective that really stood out as, wow, about time they did it, and I'm glad they did it?
Actually, no. I actually think they're all good activities to get done across all federal networks. And frankly, if I was in industry, which I am now, I would look at those as behaviors that establish a baseline from which to now depart, grow, get better, get stronger. So I think, in my opinion, you talk about two-factor authentication, that touches the user, that touches spear phishing, that touches and blunts a lot of the weakest links. So that one's huge. But guidance has been out on that for 10 or 11 years with HSPD 12. So we're now coming around to saying, hey, I really meant that. And I think we have to really take this guidance in earnest and move with it. The thing that's not in the Sprint guidance, Rob's opinion, is details. We have to get to specificity about what needs done. When we talk about generics, we will get back generics, right? So maybe that revelation will allow Tony and the OMB team to now sort of hone in on things that perform.
I'm going to nitpick at you a little bit. You're saying there's not enough specification of what needs to be done. So two-factor authentication, I agree with you that I think OMB dropped the ball on this years ago. They never did what DoD did, which was do it, you have this deadline, and if not, you're off the network. And I think that was a big mistake. And I've made comments to the former people like Karen Evans and said, hey, Karen, I don't think you should have been a little more hard on this, and I'm sure there was better reasons than I know about. But the fact is they told agencies to identify critical data assets. They told agencies to reduce the number of privileged users. What other specificity are you really looking at?
So certain ones are specified to the right level, but let's talk about critical data assets. To what level, right? Go beyond that, because you're going to get, if you ask for you ask a broad question, you're going to get a broad answer back. And part of the answer is going to be chaff. You will not need to use it. You will not be able to consume it. So that's what I mean. It's like you sort of have to ask an informed question, and maybe that's the next step. But that just tells me we have a lot more time before we can establish a baseline of performance of federal networks.
So in many ways, when you talk about critical data, it's not just we have 30 data sets. It's what needs to be done in terms of protecting those from a mission perspective. Is that what you're getting toward?
It is, but we need to understand what's on our networks, which we clearly don't. We need to understand asset management, which is the hardware, software configurations of the networks, which we clearly don't. Every CIO I've talked to, and I was in the building again today talking to a CTO who informed me, yes, we don't have this nailed. We don't know when people connect a server to the network, it's a find out after the fact, not a you do not have permission to hook that up. And that's a rampant case around the government. So now if the server's connected and nobody knows, the data that's on the server, right, isn't known either. So you see the problem just compounds itself. And then across the however many agencies there are, 182, 87 agencies, and then all their network assets, we have a real problem.
And that's one of actually the biggest complaints I heard about the Cyber Sprint is the fact that they focused on sometimes critical vulnerabilities that was kind of external. So can people find a way in? But it's the internal vulnerabilities that were really the bigger problem, because once you get in the network, and let's say you spear phishing, you mentioned that earlier, you steal someone's credentials, then you're in the network, and then you can hop and find all the vulnerabilities. In many ways, what you're talking about here is a bigger issue than the external ones.
Well, so the insider threat piece is the soft underbelly. You know, a lot of people thought, well, I have a firewall, I have intrusion detection tool, I have this and that and the other thing, and that's all I need, right? I don't have to make any other investments. So the insider threat and actually monitoring log data coming off the networks, big data crunching algorithm tools are the next coming. But frankly, setting those standards and setting those measures that will allow whoever's running the NOC to say, hey, I have a problem, or no, the fact that Jason Miller was looking at something at 9 o'clock at night and he was allowed to, wouldn't even come up.
You mentioned a couple key pieces there. Insider threat, we can get to that a little bit. You talked about big data. A couple of things. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to jump into what's next, and I think you gave us a little bit of a heads up. You're listening to Cybersecurity Viewpoints with Rob Carey, sponsored by Vencor on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.